Hello and welcome to our series, My Country, My Faith. My name is Father Owen Gorman and we are coming to you from the Cathedral Church of Ireland, the Cathedral of Holy Trinity in Downpatrick in Northern Ireland. And in this special series of My Country, My Faith, we are looking at the Eucharistic Congress in Ireland. And in this special episode, we're now going to turn our attention to a great child of the Eucharist, a little girl who died at the age of 4.5, but who had a tremendous influence on so many people, and even an extraordinary influence on the Pope at the time of her death, and that was Pope St. Pius X, for it was her life and her example and devotion to the Eucharist that led and inspired the Pope to lower the age at which children could receive Holy Communion. Here to discuss this wonderful child, this girl called Ellen Organ, with me is a mother and a grandmother from Northern Ireland who has great devotion to this little girl, and that is Jacqueline O'Hagan. Jacqueline, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Father.
Ellen Organ is a young girl who's so known to maybe an older generation of Irish people, but maybe not known so much to a younger generation, and indeed internationally perhaps, is not so well known. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of Ellen Organ?
Well, Ellen Organ, or Little Nelly as she's affectionately known by most people, Father, was born in County Waterford in Portlaw in 1903. She had 2 brothers and a sister, and her father was in the army and they had to move to Cork. And when they were in Cork, they were only there until Ellen was 3 years of age in 1907, and her mother died. Her mother took TB, or consumption. And the father, because he was in the army, wasn't able to look after the children. So with the help of the parish priest, the children were placed in orphanages. The 2 girls were sent to a place called Sunday's Wells in Cork, an orphanage run by the Good Shepherd Sisters. It was during this time that Ellen, or Little Nelly as she was called, she was known as the baby of the orphanage because she was only 3.5 at this time. When she first came to the orphanage, she was very sick, and so was her sister, and they were diagnosed as having whooping cough. They spent the first 2 months of this time in the hospital, and then afterwards they returned back to the convent. During this time, the nuns began to notice that there was something special about this child. She seemed to have extraordinary graces of being able to deny her own willfulness. She was strong-willed and could have temperaments, but all the time Little Nelly seemed to be able to undergo that, like putting her desires aside. She
had great virtue even at that stage,
yes.
But she was so inflamed also with the love of God. How did this great love for, as she used to say, holy God develop within her? Who helped her along to come to this great faith?
Well, who helped her along was in the very beginning her mother and father. They were an extremely devoted Catholic family. They would have taught her rosary. Her father used to say that as a 2-year-old child she used to go to Mass with him each Sunday, and she would be walking along prattling away about Holy God. And nobody really is able to tell how she came to call God Holy God, but this is how she addressed him always. It was always Holy God. When she prayed her rosary, she had the habit learned from her mother of kissing the crucifix and kissing the Our Fathers, the beads that when we say the Our Father on each of those beads. She had great respect and great love for the rosary. During her stay in the orphanage, she was nursed by a Nurse Hall, who was a recent convert to Catholicism. And Nurse Hall used to take her into the chapel and show her the Stations of the Cross. And it was during the Stations of the Cross that Nellie showed profound interest in the suffering of Jesus. And she would ask questions as children do, and her little mind couldn't figure out, why did Holy God allow these men to do this? And so the nurse explained to her the reason being that Jesus wanted to suffer for us. And when she heard this, she had this tremendous love for Jesus and wanting to make reparation for Jesus' suffering. So when she was sick and going through immense suffering, which she did do, she always was heard to say, "Poor Holy God, And when someone would say, oh, she's suffering a lot, she would simply say, what is that in comparison to what God has suffered for me? So even though she was just a child of 3.5, she was given extraordinary graces.
And one of the great graces was obviously her devotion to the Eucharist.
Yes, yes.
Tell us something about that.
She had this real love of Jesus in the Eucharist. And she knew when Jesus was exposed on the altar.
Even though she wasn't there?
Yes, yes. At this stage she was sick and ill in bed. And the first time that she was taken to the chapel and saw the altar and exposition was on and Jesus was in the monstrance, little Nellie spoke to the nurse and said, there he is. And she said, who, Nellie? And she said, Holy God. Without ever being told, she knew that the Eucharist was Jesus. So afterwards, when she was sick and in bed, she would constantly say to the nurses, I long for Holy God, I desire Holy God, I want Holy God, I want to receive him in Holy Communion. And of course at that time you had to be at least 12 before you could receive Holy Communion. But she also knew when Jesus was, when benediction or exposition was on, because she would say, she had a wonderful saying of Jesus is not in the lockup today. And that of course came from because her father was in the army. She would have seen the prisons and the soldiers lock in the cells, and then she would have seen the priests lock in the tabernacle. So she referred to Jesus as not in the lockup today. I want to go and see him, please take me down. Another extraordinary thing was she kept asking, may I not have the Eucharist? And the nuns would try to explain to her. Little Nellie eventually was able to receive Holy Communion. A lot of people assume it was because she was very ill and dying, but that's not correct. Little Nellie received Jesus because she had complete understanding. She had reached the full use of reason. And
it was a priest that discerned that with her in the community, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. She had an extraordinary way of touching people because they could see there was something exceptional going on here. And Father Burry, who was given retreats for the nuns, saw this and he questioned her. He asked her, Little Nellie, what is the Eucharist? And she would say, why, it's Holy God, and it is he who makes the nuns and all of us holy. And it is Jesus who comes in my tongue, and then he goes into my heart and he lives in me. And she had this desire for Jesus in the Eucharist, a desire to be with Jesus in his fullness. And you know, the Eucharist is everything. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. Unless you eat my flesh, you will not have life in you. And he infused this child with this complete knowledge, and she accepted that in all her innocence.
So Father Berry discerned this extraordinary infused understanding she had of the Eucharist. What then did he do?
Well, then he wrote to the Bishop O'Callaghan at the time, who was a Dominican bishop, and explained about little Nellie's understanding. But shortly before this, the bishop was very friendly in the orphanage and often visited, and he had already told the Mother Superior if there were any children who were ill and in danger of death, that he would come and give them confirmation. And his reason, he said, was because that it would give God glory that a child should receive a confirmation early, and also that their degree of bliss in heaven would be more. So I think that's a great thing that we should maybe come to understand when we receive sacraments, just exactly what's happening, that they're just, you know, they happen to us interiorly and they give us graces, but they have effects that affect us on this earth now and when we die, and that's what the bishop said. The Mother Superior wanted little Nellie to have her confirmation, but because she was so young, the Mother Superior wasn't quite sure. So she decided just to pray about it and not to ask the bishop, because at this particular stage, Nellie wasn't in danger of death. She was very, very ill and was suffering a lot. And one day during Mass, the bishop actually got an inspiration to go and confirm this little child, and that's what he did.
And we're going to come back to just this wonderful story of little Nellie in a moment's time, and then we'll talk with Jackie about her confirmation, but a wonderful day of her first Holy Communion. But as we go to a break now, we're going to show you some lovely shots of some of the relics, some of the effects that are associated with this wonderful child, Ellen Organ, Little Nelly of Holy God. Please join us in a moment. Jackie, we're just after seeing some of the relics, some of the little personal effects associated with Ellen Organ. One of the things we've just after seeing is this lovely statue of the Child of Prague. There's a lovely story associated with that statue in her life, isn't there?
Yes, Father. One day she went over they had made a little altar with the Child of Prague statue on it, and Nellie could play a little flute. She was able to play the flute. And she kept calling on the girl who was minding her at that stage to come in and to play music. And she was all excited and they couldn't figure out why. And she kept saying, look, baby Jesus is dancing, play music, play music. But no one was really listening to her. They thought the child was delirious in her sickness. And she got the flute up and she played all the louder and she said, look, look, he's dancing, he's dancing. So when she was so excited, she raised her temperature and got quite ill. And when the Mother Superior came in, the Mother Superior scolded the girl who was looking after her. And she said, what person came in here today? There was a man came here. Who was in with the child? And the girl explained, no one, Mother. The child kept saying that baby Jesus danced for her. We think she was delirious. And little Nellie kept insisting. She said, no, Jesus danced for me. And you know, it reminds me of the story of King David when he saw the tabernacle of God, the place where God lived, he danced. And I think Jesus spoke to little Nellie in a childish way, and he treated her as a child with great dignity and great respect, and he danced for her because he wanted to please her, because she desired him and she wanted to please him, and she saw Jesus as real. There was no difference between the statue that danced, which wasn't a statue to her, it was baby Jesus, and her desire to know Jesus became so real that the statue was alive to her. Just as perhaps sometimes we remember that the statue of Our Lady smile at St. Therese.
But Mother Superior asked for a sign, didn't she?
Oh yes, the story of this then went on to have another revelation, because Mother then queried, once again this child and her extraordinary ways of saying things and doing things, they had to pay attention to it. And Mother was a religious woman herself, and she said, as she passed the statue, she said, baby Jesus, I need some money for a bakehouse. That was to bake some bread for the orphans. And she said, I need an exact amount of money. It was something like £300. And she said, if you send me money for the bakehouse, then I will believe that you danced for little Nellie. And of course, shortly afterwards, an envelope came into the convent and it was marked bakehouse from a woman who had sent them the exact amount of money. Wow. So that was certainly a significant aspect in their lives to believe that this did happen. And you know, speaking about the relics that little Nellie left, one of them is that we have her boots. Whenever little Nellie was walking, she was in great pain, and the nuns decided that the boots were too heavy for her. So we still have those little heavy boots that she wore, because the nuns bought her little slipper shoes. But one of the other very special relics was a tooth, and this involves some of the suffering that little Nellie had to go through. She complained of a sore throat, and the doctor was called, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. And again, little Nellie was accused of being spoiled, and she would cry all night. And still, because the doctor had said there was nothing wrong with her, they thought she was just play acting. So Nurse Hall, who was very fond of this child and knew that she wasn't like that, decided to investigate herself. And on inspection of her throat, she discovered a large molar, a large adult tooth breaking through at the base of her tongue at the back of her throat. And we have this tooth as part of her relics. And she had to have this removed, and as you know, in that day and age there would have been very little anaesthetic. And again, she showed such fortitude in her suffering. She never complained. She held her crucifix and said, what is that to what God has suffered for me? And also afterwards, the nun came to her and apologised, saying to little Nellie, I'm sorry that I didn't believe you. And little Nellie says, don't worry, Mother, it's okay, I forgive you. Little Nellie wasn't worried that she was being accused. She just wanted them to know that she wasn't telling lies. She simply said, I had a sore throat. She just wanted them to know that she wasn't lying, but she had a sore throat. So she went through that suffering, and we still have that it's a big, large molar tooth as part of her relics today.
Well, a significant episode in her life was obviously when she did receive confirmation from the bishop, but
Yes.
Moving on from that, she then got to receive Holy Communion.
Yes. Well, the extraordinary thing as well, about after receiving the sacrament of confirmation, Nellie received in a great way the gift of fortitude, because it is said that after she received her confirmation, she never lost her patience, and yet this child suffered tremendously. She'd been dropped as a baby, and when she came to the convent, because she found it difficult in walking, and she cried a lot, it wasn't known, it wasn't discovered till later that she actually had, her spine was curved and her hip was out of joint. So sitting and walking caused her great pain. Later she developed a disease of the jawbone called caries, which is a wasting away of the jawbone, and that had to be syringed every day with an injection. So she had much suffering. Later on, she actually died from the same illness as her mother, which was tuberculosis. So she had all these sufferings which she offered up to Jesus. But after receiving confirmation, she received the gift of fortitude during suffering. She didn't cry, you know, and this was just like a baby. She held her cross and she said, "What is this compared with what Holy God suffered?" And she would constantly say, "Poor Holy God, poor Holy God." And I think myself that she references Jesus so much like the life of Jesus. Like in the tabernacle, Nellie was an orphan and Jesus is an orphan in the tabernacle. So few people go to see him. He sits alone like Nellie, alone and unwanted. And Nellie desired Jesus. And once we desire Jesus, he comes to us, and this is what he did for her. She desired that he would come to her. And so she received this great grace, and it was shown in her life, the gift of fortitude. So the priest father was very anxious at this time then about her Holy Communion, and she was given permission by the bishop to receive Holy Communion on the understanding that she had full knowledge of what it was to have her first confession and penance and what sin was, and also to receive Jesus in the Eucharist. And so the final day came around, and she was absolutely, just couldn't sleep all night, kept Nurse Hall wakened. She wanted dressed in white because she knew that to receive Jesus you have to be pure of heart, and this was her significance as well. When she received Jesus, Nellie, the description of the people at that time are that she would almost went into an ecstasy. They almost thought that she was dead because she was so quiet and so still, but there was a light came from this child. And then later when she was in her room and received Jesus, she received him 32 times in all before she died, there was a smell of incense surrounded her bed. She spent long hours afterwards, Father, in reverence and prayer to Jesus, a long time. And when she was asked, "What were you doing, little Nellie?" And she simply said, "I was talking to Holy God."
After her death, Jackie, there was a great devotion that began to emerge to her from people both at home and abroad. But one of the people who developed a devotion to her was the Pope, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right, Father. Nellie seemed to have this extraordinary way with everyone that came in contact with her, and with even someone like the Holy Father. It actually transformed the lives of children everywhere to this very day. It seems that there was a French priest who took great interest, and in France there was great devotion to little Nellie. In fact, it was the French who christened her the Violet of the Holy Eucharist. And a French priest took the life of little Nellie to the Holy Father, and it seems that the Holy Father said, "This is the sign that I was waiting on," because at that time the Holy Father wanted to give younger children frequent Holy Communion. And when he was asked, could little Nellie be made a saint, he said, she is very young, and we only have one saint at that time, was a 2-year-old boy, but he was a martyr. And the Holy Father said, yes, little Nellie was an angel, but there will have to be miracles if she's to be a saint, and she's very young, but who knows in the future. But what he did say was her little life was extraordinary. She had extraordinary graces. And he gave a blessing to the priests that anyone who would recommend frequent Holy Communion to little children, boys and girls, and who would propose little Nellie as their example, So it's from the Holy Father that we get this blessing to use her in catechesis and to teach children and indeed adults about reverence for Jesus and what the Blessed Sacrament really is.
And that's something that you have pursued in your own life, because as a person who is promoting devotion to her and as using her as an example, you are trying within your own parish just to bring forward devotion to her and help other people to learn from her life and example.
Yes, Father. I'm remembering St. Edith Stein. Part of her journey of becoming a Catholic was she went into a Catholic chapel, and when she saw these people coming in with their groceries, kneeling down, and she asked, what are they kneeling before? And when she was explained that Jesus is in the Blessed Sacrament, that was one of the reasons why she became a Catholic. So I feel that it's very, very important to bring back reverence to Jesus before we receive him, when he's out and exposed on the tabernacle, and at Mass and after Mass, our prayer of thanksgiving that we have virtually forgotten about. And all of Little Nellie's life shows us this. That's how Jesus became so real to her, because she wasn't afraid to show her love and her desire and her respect for Jesus. So in our parish we have a prayer group, and it's specifically for prayer, especially for little children. And it involves all children, orphans, abused children. We pray for them all. And in my life, we've had a few people gathered around who are mothers and grandparents who were broken-hearted, really, Father, about their children losing their faith. And so they wanted to try and do something about this. And part of that is that they can pray for their children, and that they can begin and keep continuing to teach them reverence, to bring them to the Blessed Sacrament, to let them see that Jesus is real, and that this isn't a thing of the past, that this is more relevant today than it ever was. And actually here in Ireland this year we have the Eucharistic Congress, and Little Nelly is a perfect example for us to be able to use, and it gives parents a great hope, because they have something concrete to say, well look, this is what this little child's life achieved. And that's really what and if anyone is interested, there is a format set up.
A little booklet.
A little booklet, yes. Yeah. So it'll be simple. You won't have to make up any special prayers. You just need permission from your priest. And we can have that. We've got an email address. If anybody wants the email address, they can have that, and we'll give them the prayer booklet. So
I think that as part of your own prayer group around Little Nelly, the Ellen Organ prayer group, that you do pray for an increase of people's devotion to her, because she's not a saint of the church, but we would very much emphasize the importance of prayer to her, for sick children, for people who are looking for miracles, and please God, that miracles will be granted through her intercession, that she will be raised to the level of a blessed of the church and a saint of the church. It'd be wonderful for Ireland and for the church generally to have this child raised to that level.
Yes, Father, this is very, very true. It would be wonderful of Little Nelly. But there are people who most certainly over the years have attributed miracles to her. But that is up to the church to decide, and they will do that. But in the meantime, we have got this great blessing from the Holy Father, who's told us, use this child as an example. And we're always, it's not even so much for this child, this is for the glory of Jesus, and Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. And until we come back to realise the true faith and the truth that we have of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. And I would say to anyone who's struggling with this, to go to Jesus and to ask him, and to go to our Holy Mother and say to her, please Jesus, Holy Mother, if Jesus is real, help me to understand. And I would say to them, use Little Nelly, pray to her, because you can do that, and you can ask her for this understanding that Jesus gave her. During the prayer group we have, it's an hour, because it's a holy hour. We have benediction, and we have the rosary, of course, because we always want Our Lady comes and leads us to Jesus. And we have some time of silent prayer. And during the reflections are all based towards particular needs of the children. Also their grandparents, we pray for them as well, that they will be able to realise that their disheartedness that they feel about their children losing their faith, that they can come and they can give this to Jesus. And we're praying for all children who've been abused. We want to, and we know that little Nellie would want this because she was raised in an orphanage and she knows what it's like to feel alone and be abandoned. And that's what we're praying for, Father. So that's basically what it's about.
Well, Jackie, thank you, and God bless your initiative.
Thank you,
and
Father.
we just emphasise the importance of this young girl, and it'd be wonderful if prayer groups dedicated to these intentions for little children, for those who are making their first Holy Communion, for their families, would grow and develop. And there's a booklet available for that in the email address that you will see on caption. We thank you for joining us, and we invite you to be with us again for the special series of My Country, My Faith on the Eucharistic Congress. God bless you all.